there is a marriage of death and beauty. There is a marriage of death and hope. Welcome to Ostracon, a podcast that translates fragments into the whole from which they came. Today we're reading If I Believe by E. Cummings from the 1922 manuscript of his poetry collection, Tulips and Chimneys. Paraphrasing the biography from his centennial edition of his complete poems, he was born in 1894. At the time of his death in 1962, E. Cummings was, next to Robert Frost, the most widely read poet in America. He was born in Massachusetts, lived much of his life in Greenwich Village, and in New Hampshire, where he died. Again, the centennial edition of his poetry reports, combining Thoreau's uncontrolled belligerence with the brash abandon of an uninhibited bohemian, Cummings, together with Pound Elliott and William Carlos Williams, helped bring about the 20th century's revolution in literary expression. He is recognized on the one hand as the author of some of the most beautiful lyric poems written in the English language, and on the other as one of the most inventive American poets of his time. And certainly his dramatic, inventive, and often completely unexpected experimentations with grammar and syntax can change your mind about how things can be said and what words and phrases can mean. So let's begin by reading the poem, If I Believe. If I believe in death, be sure of this, it is because you have loved me. Moon and sunset, stars and flowers, gold crescendo and silver muting of sea tides I trusted not. One night, when in my fingers drooped your shining body, when my heart sang between your perfect breasts, darkness and beauty of stars was on my mouth, petals danced against my eyes, and down the singing reaches of my soul spoke the green greeting, pale departing, irrevocable sea, I knew thee, death. And when I have offered up each fragrant night, when all my days shall have before a certain face become white perfume only, from the ashes then thou wilt rise, and thou wilt come to her and brush the mischief from her eyes, and fold her mouth the new flower with thy unimaginable wings, where dwells the breath of all persisting stars. Two things come to mind upon reading this poem immediately. The first line and the whole of ideas that are brought together in the poem. The first line, if I believe in death, be sure of this, it is, and then there's a break, because you have loved me. And the wonderful thing about this line is it can be read so many ways that lead to the same end and set the stage for the whole piece. First, it's conditional, if I believe. So he may not believe, but he has the experience of death. And so belief doesn't seem to be a belief in whether or not it exists. It seems to be a belief about what it is that he experiences. He says, if I believe in death, be sure of this, it is. So first you have the contrast between the conditional if and then the certainty. But if he believes it's so, then he's certain that it is, and then there's a break. In some sense, saying that death will be as much as you believe it to be. If I believe, then be sure it is. But then if you read through the break, which you seem to be intended to do, because as we'll talk about in a moment, the whole poem seems to be about moving through one thing to the next. If you read through the break, it is, If I believe in death, be sure of this, it is because you have loved me. So it is the experience of love that makes him aware of loss. It's the great potential of what can be that makes the failure to hold on to it death. They are relational. Going back to the conditional if, it also seems that he can only believe, or the narrator can only believe in death because of the love. In other words, if all of life is a chaos, a negation, a numbness, then why believe in death if you're going from one nothing to nothing? But when there is love, and not only that there is love, but when the narrator is loved and has the experience of being loved, then loss becomes possible. And perhaps the final and most important way to read it is that because of love, that loss is not loss, but is transition. And this returns to my second point, that the whole collection of images is one of the most striking things about this poem when first you read it. You're confronted with death, love, the beauty of stars, petals, flowers, perfume, fragrance, mouths, unimaginable wings, breath. There is a collision. In fact, I think you could go further and say a marriage. There is a marriage of death and beauty. There is a marriage of death and hope. The marriage of the two is expressed in all the ways we unpacked that opening line. If I believe in death, be sure of this, it is because you have loved me. They're married because the love at once makes possible the loss, but then also gives meaning to the loss, even transforms the sense of loss into an experience of, or a growth into, love. This is, in the marriage of these concepts, we can say a resurrectional poem. And that's not only because it says expressly at one point, from the ashes then thou wilt rise, and thou wilt come to her and brush the mischief from her eyes. Not only because it says it, but also because we see a transitional motion through the poem. Let's follow it. We begin with the beautiful things of nature, moon and sunset, stars and flowers, gold crescendo and silver muting, which makes of these beautiful things a sort of song. Sea tides that suggest the movement among them, the sunset to the moon, the flowers at hand to the distance of the stars. He's not sure he trusts them, maybe because of their fragility, maybe because of their beauty, but he's with them. And they become, so to speak, the first reference to the lover in the poem, when in my fingers drooped your shining body. And then his heart sings in response. And these beautiful and fragile things of nature become his own in the way that he holds the body of the loved. The darkness and the beauty of stars are on his mouth. The petals of the flowers dance against his own eyes and down the singing reaches of his soul. And the sea tides that he trusts not initially, instead, he says, my soul spoke the green greeting, pale departing, irrevocable sea. All of these beautiful and fragile things of nature, whose trust he questions, are imparted to him in the moment of love, and in the moment that out of him comes the song of this love. And then, as a result, I knew thee, death. So here you have, as we begin to unpack with the first line, the relationship that it is out of the great potentiality of human love that we then know its opposite in loss. But now we have a second move. First, we go from the lack of trust into acceptance. We go from the conditional "if I believe" to the "because you have loved me." In the experience of love, there's a move of trust to acceptance, even identification. Then the next move, the next transition in the poem, is one of lived experience. And when I have offered up each fragrant night. So now it's not just the stars and the flowers. They are the fragrance of his life, the love that he has lived, the nights that he has offered. When all my days shall have before a certain face become white perfume only, from the ashes then thou wilt rise. So, in the lived experience of his life and his lived death, when all the days become white perfume only, almost suggesting incense, and here you have ashes, then thou wilt rise. The death becomes transformative. Thou wilt brush the mischief from her eyes and fold her mouth. So darkness and the beauty of stars was on his mouth when he sang. But now, on the other side of loss, it's her mouth to be folded. And not just the fragile beauty of the world that challenged his trust, but now, fold her mouth, the new flower, with thy unimaginable wings, where dwells the breath of all persisting stars. We've gone beyond the distant stars, the tides between the day and night. Now we are at the persisting stars, those that always burn, those that always provide light and direction, and they are in her breath, so that the love that is shared moves beyond the transience of the tides and into permanence. It moves beyond one night when in my arms drooped your shining body, to all persisting stars in the breath. The body becomes in a way of material beauty, in a transformed and heightened experience of the material world, becomes a permanent expression of a love that now cannot be extinguished. The petals of the flowers no longer go down into the singing reaches of his soul, but they are now the new mouth, the new flower that persists. The poem is resurrectional because it expresses everything that we hope for, that love is not transient, that the world is not negation, that love can heighten the world and draw us beyond the world, and that the loss of the world can be a transformative experience that brings one in to the truth of a persisting and unchanging love, that there is so great a pinnacle to be reached, and that death, loss of self, surrender to this highest hope is the bridge that carries us through to be in it. The composition of this permanent beauty is not some kind of a separate intellectual or ethereal thing, but that it's made up of all the things that we have known and loved all along but transformed into a higher order of being. The fragile beauty of the world that at first maybe can't be trusted becomes the tangibility of love, and then becomes again the great beauty of an eternal love that does not wilt, does not fade, does not have tides, but persists. It is the idea of the resurrection of the body, that the beauty of the things we have resides in them because they are good. And when they are proved out in their true and eternal forms, they're not lost, but perfected, deepened. That the beauty we have here is a sign of a deeper and greater beauty to be possessed permanently. The love that we have here, even the shining body that droops one night in our hands, is a prefigurement of the great and permanent beauty. And as you follow the progression of the poem, this first transforms the narrator. Then it brings him to his knowledge of death. Then it brings him to the experience of death. And then it brings him, as through a gateway, beyond the ashes, where the eyes are uncovered, and folds the new flower, where dwells the breath of all persisting stars. That word breath even harkens back to creation, where God breathes into humanity and gives them life, image, purpose, destiny. There is that first creation. Then there's the creation that continues through all lives and through the life of the speaker here, who's created by his discovery of love and his death in love. And this ultimate fulfillment is expressed in the same term of breath, of ennoblement, of becoming. It is the continued creative action of the Holy Spirit. And it's right to describe these concepts as being married, right even that they should be expressed in the form of romantic love, because it is with that destiny, with that passion, that we long from the shadows of the now for the fullness of fulfillment.